started. Sorry, I was a little bit late. Before we go back to chapter 8, I would like to discuss the last exam. So we already scheduled our second exam, but the last exam, exam number 3, I'm thinking about we are taking the last exam on December the 3rd. So that's going to be a Monday. So that's going to be the last day of this semester. So we are going to take the last exam on December 3rd in class. Yes?
We don't have a final, like that's it, right?
That's it. We don't have a final, but we have exam number 3. But the last exam is not going to be cumulative, so it will cover whatever chapters we are covering after the second exam. So it's not going to be cumulative. So there's no time.
And this is during class time, right?
Yes, during the regular class time. So Monday, the last Monday, December the 3rd, that's the last day of the regular semester. So we are gonna take the last exam on that day. So how many chapters are we going to cover? That really depends on how many chapters we can complete. So probably in 2 weeks we will figure out how many chapters we are going to include in the last exam. But we're going to take the last exam on the 3rd, December 3rd. Any other questions? So last class we were talking about a few forecasting methods. So we have one more forecasting method to be covered, that is regression analysis. So in the previous chapters, we work on the regression. So in this chapter, regression analysis or regression modeling is one of the techniques we can use for forecasting. So normally we use simple linear regression models. So if we want to identify the relationship between one independent variable and one dependent variable. So again, you have to plot your historical data first to see if it fits a linear line or not. So normally, if it fits a linear line, let's use the linear simple regression model. So the variable to be forecasted, for example, the sales, temperature, and so on and so forth, and trend variable. So normally when we talk about time series, the axis represents the time. So every year or every month and so on and so forth. So that could be our trend variable as an independent variable. So normally, if we look at one example, we just use the simple linear regression. B0 plus B1 times T, so T is the time, and if we fit the model, so using the bicycle example, so we will have this model, and if we plug the number in there, if we want to do some forecasting, so the 11th time period, so you just plug in the time there, so we'll get the number. So if we do the linear regression, because we already did that in the previous chapters, we are not going to do that in this class for this example. So we get the p-value and so on and so forth. You will see the p-value for the intercept and the slope. But sometimes we have to consider more complicated format of the regression model. For example, if the relationship is not linear, it's non-linear, sometimes you have to consider more complicated form in terms of the time t. Or if one data point depends on the previous one and maybe 2 or 3 recent periods. So we have to consider this form. So the current period, the value of the current period depends on the previous one and t minus 2 and t minus 3. So it depends on the sales or the values of the previous or the recent 3 periods. So that's called autoregressive models. When the the value depends on the previous period. So that's a so-called autoregressive model. But in the last lecture, we said sometimes we can see the seasonality there. If we talk about sales, umbrella, or even ice cream and so on and so forth, it has seasonality. What if we consider the seasonality without trend? That means the average could be constant, but we see the seasonality there because of the weather or the time period we talk about. Then how do we model the seasonality or the seasonal pattern? So in the previous chapters we said, if we want to model the seasonality, we have to introduce some dummy variables. So if we have k periods, the number of dummy variables we have to introduce is k minus 1. So if you have 4 seasons, that means in your regression model, you have to have 3 dummy variables. So if we look at this, how we model that, so quarter 1, quarter 2, and 3, so quarter 1, so that's a dummy variable we want to introduce. The first one, that variable is equal to 1 if the period t is the first quarter. Otherwise, it's 0. If the second quarter is equal to 1, the variable is equal to 1 if the period that we are talking about is the second quarter, and so on and so forth. And if everything is equal to 0, that means we are talking about the fourth quarter. So if we put all those variables into this regression model, so the general format is y hat, which is the predicted value, is equal to the intercept plus the first quarter, second one, fourth one. So we have 3 dummy variables if our data shows seasonality only. So that's one example we had. So in the original data set, we have the period, we have the year, probably we have the quarter, we have the sale. We don't have those 3 columns. If we want to develop a regression model, so those 3 columns are those we have to add into the Excel file. So corresponding to the definition of dummy variables, quarter 1, 2, 3, we have to populate the values. So if we have that, then we will have a regression model. Then if there's a trend plus the seasonality, so we do have seasonality, but we are experiencing, we are seeing a trend of going up or going down. So in that case, we still have to model the quarter or seasonality using the dummy variables. But in addition to those dummy variables, we still need to model the time, because the time has impact on the sales. Because we have a trend, no matter it's going up, it's going down. In either case, T has some contribution to our predicted value. For example, the smartphone time series, I think we do have some data. Let me see, smartphone. So that's the data we have. If we plot the data in a scatter plot, we will see the seasonality there, and we also see the trend. So in this case, if we want to develop a regression model, let's go back here. So we have to consider 3 more variables: quarter 1, 2, and 3. So how about everyone please download this file, smartphone sales Excel file. I think it's under the chapter 8 folder. Smartphone sales. regression model to predict the cell phone sale. So how many periods we have? So we have 4 years. How about let's predict the first quarter of the 5th year. So let's use this one to develop a regression model, and we predict the value of the first quarter of the 5th year. And because this is something we already covered when we were talking about regression analysis, so I will do this really quick. So if you know how to do that, you can work on the regression modeling. You don't have to follow my steps. in the first quarter, the value is equal to 1. Otherwise, it's equal to gonna be 0. That function here. I think many of you are having problem with putting the if condition. So what I said is here is so if the quarter value is equal to 1, I want the function to return 1. That means I want this variable's value equals 1. Otherwise, if it's quarter 2, 3, or 4, I want it to return 0. So that's the first one. For the second quarter, because this Q2, that's a coming variable for quarter 2. This variable should equal 1 if we are looking at the second quarter. So what I did is that if the quarter value is equal to 2, the function return value of 1. Otherwise, it should return 0. So that means if this value is 1 or 3 or 4, the function should return 0. It only returns 1 when that value is equal to 2. And the third one is the same. I have to check the quarter value. So if the quarter value is equal to 3, the function will return 1. If there's any other values, it will return 0. And then you copy the functions for all the rest of the period. So if you're done with this one, please do a regression model, and please save the file. At the end of this class, we don't need to turn in this one, but please keep the file for yourselves, because in the exam we may have a similar question like this. So any questions before we move on to the next one?
Okay, wait, sorry.
Yes. Okay.
So, the values you put in for Y, is that the scale for the X and the quarter?
The act is the period Q1, Q2, and Q3. There should be 4 variables.
And then the Y is the sales.
The Y sales. So if we want to do some prediction, so that's what we want to do. So if we want to calculate the first quarter, the second dummy variable, the third dummy variable will be 0, and we have to plug in the t value. So here let's see how many I wrote this, but no, we added one more column period, so that you have to, if you want to predict the next period, you have to put the t value again. So that's seasonality with the trend. We have to consider quarters or seasonalities and the impact of the time. Then sometimes we use this regression analysis to develop a causal model. We want to see what is the cause of the high sales or poor sales. So that's why we have an independent variable and dependent variable. So we want to build the relationship. So we hope that we can find that the independent variable is the cause of the dependent variable. So for example, how much money you want to put in the advertisement when the sales are to be forecasted. So if I invest in $10,000, then what's going to be my predicted sales? What if I increase this investment, then what's going to be the sales? And the mortgage rate when the new housing construction to be forecasted, the GPA when starting, you wanna forecast the starting salary. So that have that the average GPA has impact on the starting salary or the price and the demand. We know that the demand depends on the price. So that's something we can find if we use the regression model. And the value of Dow Jones Industrial Average when the value of an individual stock is to be forecast. So if we want to forecast the value or the price of one individual stock, it depends on the average index. So if the whole market is going down, most likely your individual stock's price is also going down. It's not 100% sure, but it's most likely. And the daily high temperature when the electricity usage is to be forecasted. When the temperature is really high, we expect to have a really high electricity usage. So everyone is turning on the AC, the consumption is really high. So that's the causal model. So we can use regression analysis to do that. So we build a regression model to see if the slope or the parameter of the variable is significant or not. If it's not significant, probably that's not a major factor of your dependent variable. So we can use that to predict the cause of some high sales or high electricity usage and so forth. Now another one, the pizza example, the restaurants and student population and sales. So we have different restaurants, we have different student populations, and we have the sales data. So based on our experience, if we open a restaurant near a university or a high school or other schools, we would expect the student population impact your sales. So opening a restaurant here near Valdosta State versus opening a restaurant near, say, Florida State in Tallahassee. Because those two universities have different student populations. Obviously, Florida State has a much larger population than we do here. So that means if you have a restaurant here and you want to open a new one near FSU, so you can do your regression analysis. You have a regression model, then you use this model to forecast what if I open restaurants in FSU, what's going to be the sales? Depending, of course, we need to get the population of students at FSU, but we can do some forecasting if we have the data. So in this case, we plot our historical data here. So it looks like linear, so probably we decide to use linear regression. Then here is the model. We have the file, but we don't have to work on it in the class. So that's the regression model. Then you can plug in the population of the students. Then you will get the predicted sales. And causal variables with trend and seasonality and so on and so forth. We kind of covered those things. So whether a regression approach provides a good forecast depends largely on how well we are able to identify and obtain data for independent variables. So in real application, there may be many factors, or you may have many independent variables. But which one is the cause? That's something we have to think about. Should you include 2 independent variables or 3 independent variables? If you want to include one of the variables, do you have enough data to do the regression analysis? So in real application, there are more things we have to think about. And determine the best forecasting model to use. It's really hard to say which one is the best, but sometimes you have to look at your data first. So you have to plot your data in a scatter plot. Then we'll say, okay, this is kind of linear relationship, or this kind of curve or non-linear relationship. Then you will see which model is the best. So if certain relationships appear totally random, this may lead you to exclude those variables from the model. So if you have a plot for one x variable and the y variable or your sales, and you see, okay, the pattern is totally random. That means this variable is not a major factor to the y variable. You can include that in your previous model. So adding that variable does not contribute to the accuracy of your model. And you have to consider the errors, and some software, some programs have the capability of telling you based on the data. You give the data to the program, then that program will tell you which model is the best fit. So I'm not sure how many of you have learned SAP. I know some classes you have SAP. Okay? I know some classes have SAP components, and SAP has the function of giving you the best fit model. So when I was working on simulation model, I have to analyze the inputs. Then that software is called Arena, so that's a simulation model, a simulation software. That software will tell me which model is the best. Some software can do that, but others cannot. I think that's all we need to do for this chapter. So in this chapter, we learned a few forecasting methods. So let's be familiar with how to use different methods to do some analysis, and also how to measure the accuracy. So we talk about some of the measurements of the accuracy. Okay? So let's have those key points in mind. So that's chapter 8. So the next chapter we are going to cover is chapter 10. So chapter 9, if we have enough time by the end of the semester, we can cover some of the chapter 9. Otherwise, we will just skip chapter 9. So chapter 10 is about spreadsheet models. You have decision-making problem. You want to know which decision is the best decision you are going to make. You have to translate all the data or all the description in Excel file or into a mathematical format. You want to develop a mathematical model and solve the model to see, okay, here is, if I make this decision, my profit is this much. What if I make that kind of decision? Okay, here is my profit or revenue. So that's the model we are going to deal with in this chapter. So normally we talk about what if analysis. We are not talking about optimization. So the model we talk about in this chapter does not give us the best solution. So it's not like I give the software the data, you tell me the best solution. It's not like that. But in the following chapters, we will talk about that kind of methodology. But here is that in this what if model, we give input and the program will give us output. And we give input a different input, they will give us maybe a different output. Then we need to compare the outputs, the difference between different outputs based on the scenario that we defined. So that's the model we are going to deal with. So in this method, in this model, it's not going to be very complicated. We are not dealing with complicated algorithm and so on and so forth. So let's see what we have. So let's just use a very simple example. So for manufacturing, there are a lot of decisions we have to make. One of the decisions is to decide if you need one component to manufacture your whole product. do you want to manufacture that component by yourself, or you can buy the component from another supplier? So that's the decision we usually make when we talk about manufacturing. We know right now everything is done by so many companies. Your iPhone, so maybe the display or of course the chip is from Apple itself. It's designed by the Apple, but the manufacturing is done by a Taiwan semiconductor company. But the display and other chips are from different vendors. So you're not manufacturing all the components by yourself. So if we want to make this kind of decision, make versus buy decision, we have to consider our cost. Does making it by ourselves save us money, or buying it from another vendor save us money? So that's something we have to consider. So everything goes to the cost. So if we talk about the manufacturing, what if I do the manufacturing by myself? So we have to consider two types of cost. One is the fixed cost. So fixed cost is the cost that does not depend on how many units you are going to produce. No matter you are producing 1 unit or 1 million units, you have the same fixed cost. If you decide to manufacture that component by yourself, you have to have a factory, you have to have a warehouse, you have to buy the machine and so on and so forth, you have to hire people and so on and so forth. So those are the fixed costs. No matter you are producing 1 or 1 million, you have to invest this amount of money. So that's fixed cost. The other one is called variable cost. So that cost depends on the quantity of products you produce. So if you already took management 3300 production and operations management, I think that is part of is one of the topics in that class. So the variable cost really depends on how many products or how many units you are going to produce. So we are going to make this decision: buying or making it by ourselves. Before we make the decision, we have to analyze all the cost items. So if we want to do the manufacturing, what are the cost items we have to consider? What if we want to purchase the component from vendor? What are the cost items we have to consider? Then we have to visualize the relationship between different cost items using a diagram, so-called influence diagram. So that's a visual representation that shows which entities influence others in the model. So we use the circle or oval to represent a factor, and we use the arrow to represent the impact. So let's see one example. If we decide to do the manufacturing by ourselves, so in the textbook we have one example. So this company wants to manufacture, want to have one product. So it's considering, should they buy the product directly from a vendor or they do the manufacturing by themselves? So if they want to do the manufacturing by themselves, so they want to consider the total manufacturing cost. So that's the ultimate cost they have to consider. How to calculate this manufacturing cost? As we discussed, it has a fixed cost and a variable cost. The warehouse, machine, and so on and so forth, so that's the fixed part. And the variable cost is the other part. Then there are many other things or many other factors that can impact this variable cost. For example, the cost per unit. So how much money I have to spend, do I have to spend for every unit I produce? So that is one factor. The other factor is quantity required. How many units do you want to manufacture? Or how many units do we need? So that's the influence diagram for manufacturing that product. Then if I want to make a decision, making it or buying it, I have to consider the difference between manufacturing and purchasing. So then the major factor is the difference in the cost of manufacturing and outsourcing. So we call it outsourcing. So in order to calculate the difference, of course, we need the manufacturing cost, the total manufacturing cost, and the total purchase cost or outsource cost. And this part we already talked about in the previous slide. And what is the total outsourcing or purchase cost? So it also depends on the quantity, how many units you need, and also the purchase cost per unit. What is the wholesale price? What is the price your supplier or your vendor charge you? So that's the whole diagram. Again, this is a very simplified example. In real application, you have to consider other cost items. It's not just this simple. But our purpose of showing this one is to let you know that before we do the modeling, we have to visualize, we have to incorporate all the factors in one model so that when you develop a model, you are not missing one or more than one key factors. So if you look at the arrow, it means the fixed cost will impact the total manufacturing cost. So that's the relationship we have to build. Then let's talk about the model. So we already listed all the factors or the cost items we have to consider. Then let's try to put our model together. Then let's build a mathematical model. So there are a few factors we have to consider or for the nodes that we have in the diagram. So the first one is quantity. So if you go back, so that's quantity required. So let's use Q to denote the quantities or the number of units we need for this part. And then fixed cost. So we use FC to denote the fixed cost. So normally, the notation-wise, we want the notations as simple as possible. But when we look at the notation, it should be easier for our audience to read. So FC it's easy for us to know it's a fixed cost. Okay? And the third one, variable cost, the per unit variable cost of manufacturing. So we see normally those are the notations we want to use. And the total cost to manufacture the Q units. So that's the TMC, the total manufacturing cost. It depends on the quantities. So those are some of the notations we have for building the mathematical model. Then if we have the data, let's assume we have the data. What we need to do is to plug the data in there. So the cost volume model for producing Q units, so this is the one we want to calculate. We know the total cost is equal to the fixed cost plus the variable cost, and the variable cost is the product of the per unit cost and the quantities. So that's the notation we got from the previous slide. Then if we plug the numbers in there, if we have the data, say the fixed cost is 234,000, and the variable cost per unit is $2 per unit. So we plug the numbers in there, so then we have a function. So the total manufacturing cost is the fixed value plus $2 times our quantity. So that's the equation for manufacturing the product. Then what about the purchasing the product? We have P, we have Q. So P is the price. So price, we choose the first letter of price, so that's the P. So if you want to purchase that, so that's the price for the value you have to pay for the purchase. Then the Q is still the order quantity. So if we say the purchase price is $3.5, then the total purchasing cost or outsourcing cost is equal to 3.5 times the number of units you need. So our job is to compare this value with this value, or let's calculate the difference between those values. So if you just look at those two equations, the TMC versus the TCP. So this one, so what if I only need a few units of this product? Which one is better? Which model is better? Say I only need 10 units. Purchase. So purchase. Because if I do the manufacturing by myself, no matter it's equal to the 1 or 1 million, I have to, this is something I have to pay. So if I have a relative smaller amount of needs, probably I don't have to bother to build my factory or buy machines. I just find a vendor. Okay, I need 10 units or 100 units. And although the price is a little higher than the cost that I would have by doing manufacturing by myself, but I don't have to pay for this amount. But if you need a lot of components or you need a lot of that kind of products, then you may think about, okay, how about let me do this manufacturing by myself? But the problem is, how do we know the break-even point? Which quantity will make those two cost items equal? So that's something we may want to know. So the saving, so let's talk about saving. Saving is just the difference between those two cost items. If the saving is, if the S is a positive number, that means manufacturing cost is greater than the outsourcing cost. In that case, purchasing from the vendor would be better. Otherwise, we would go for the manufacturing. So the problem is, the company has to decide for what quantities is it more cost effective to outsource rather than do the manufacturing by itself. Then, if we translate the English into mathematical form, that means for what value of Q is, the saving is greater than 0. Then we have to build a spreadsheet model. So we have to incorporate all those factors. But before we put all the notations in the spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheets, we have to look into each of the factors. So if you look at all the notations, the Q, the fixed cost, variable cost, total manufacturing cost, price, total outsourcing or purchase cost, and the saving, some factors or some notations or some variables depend on other variables, and some variables do not depend on any of other variables. So if we look at the total manufacturing cost, total purchase cost, and the saving or the difference between two costs. So they are functions of other components. So as the saving is equal to the first one minus the second one. So it's a function of other components. And the Q, the FC, the fixed cost, variable cost, the P are not. They are not functions of other costs. Then those will be formulas. So when we put all the notations in the model, we want to use some equations to denote those cost items or those parameters. And then the QSE, those are just numbers. We want to enter the numbers for those values. Those are our inputs. Then for the values or for the factors that do not depend on other factors, factors or other components, we also need to look into that further. So the Q, so the company wants to determine for what values of Q such that the saving is greater than 0. So Q is their decision. So the price P, that's not their decision. They cannot decide what other suppliers charge for the product, but Q is the decision they can make. And the others, FC or the fixed cost, variable cost, and P are the variable factors that will define the whole process that you are modeling. So we refer to the fixed cost, variable cost, and P as parameters. So those values we cannot change. So those are not our decisions, but Q is our decisions. So we have two categories for the components that do not depend on other components. Then let's open up Excel file. So let's give the input the company's name. So in the Excel model, we have to use different areas for different components. So let's put our parameters as the first part of our model. So for the parameter, we have the fixed cost. Let me close that. For the fixed cost. Manufacturing fixed cost. Then the second item is the manufacturing variable cost. Is per unit. So that's add. And the third one will be, so this is about manufacturing by itself. Then the other option is to purchase the product from the vendor. So the other one is sorting. Per unit. So those are the items or components that we have no control of. Then let's build our model, the actual model. So in our model, let's define our decision variable first. So quantity is the decision variable in our model. Then we need to put the components that are functions of other components. So the first one is our total manufacturing cost. Manufacturing cost. And for the other option, so that's we purchase the product from a vendor, so that's going to be total the purchase cost. Then the last number or the last parameter we have to put in there is the saving, or the difference between those. Let's say savings. Now let's give some numbers here. So let's put some numbers here. So the manufacturing fixed cost, let's say 234,000. And manufacturing variable cost would be 2. And if we purchase from other vendors, that would be 3. Alright, 3.5. What if I want to have 10,000 units? So how do we calculate this total manufacturing cost? So that's, we produce the products by ourselves. So we have to include our fixed costs. So right now, let's not enter the numbers. Let's enter the equations. So it's equal to the fixed cost plus the variable cost per unit times the quantity needed. Then the purchase cost would be the price times the quantity that we need. Manufacturing is the fixed cost plus the manufacturing variable cost times the quantity. So let me put the equation here. So the saving should be, let's say, the difference between the manufacturing cost and the purchase cost. So now we have the model built up. Parameters, the values that we cannot change, our design variable, quantity, and some measurements we want to deal with, the manufacturing cost, the purchase cost, and what's the difference between those two models. So that means if we need 10,000 units of the product, the difference between manufacturing it by ourselves and purchasing it from other vendor is 290,000. So that means if that's a quantity, which one is better? Purchasing from other vendors is better. So that gives us a way smaller cost. If that's the case, if this is the case, let me highlight that. Save this one. So any questions on building this model? What do you
Want us to save it as?
save it? You can name the file. Yeah, you can name the file. You don't have to follow name. So I didn't name it. I just used the book one. general principles when we build our models in spreadsheet. So the first one is we need to separate the parameters from the model, because the parameters may change. So right now the purchase cost per unit is 3.5. What if I get a bid from another vendor and they said, okay, I can offer $3 per unit. What if the value changes? Then that's why we have to separate the parameters from the model. And the second one, document the model. If you wanna highlight something, or if adding some colors or highlighting some of the equations can make it easier to read, let's do that. So here, if you wanna highlight the decision variable, you can do that. Because this is a very simple model, even if we do not highlight that, we know this is a decision variable. And using simple formulas. So let's not use complicated formulas. So here we only have like 3 formulas, but for the last one, savings, we can directly put all those components into these equations, but we don't have to do that. We just want to keep it simple, because a simpler function will have less error probably. So if we have a really lengthy equations, so probably we will make a mistake when we type in the equation. So let's keep it simple. Then let's do some what-if analysis. So the Excel file has a function of doing what-if analysis. So when we do Excel what-if analysis, there are 2 things we can do. One is a one-way data table analysis, the other is two-way table analysis. So one-way table is to summarize a single input's impact on the output. We change the value of one of the variables or one of the parameters. So two-way means we can change the values of 2 inputs and see what happens to our output. Let me delete those things. We already did that. So one application is to do the one-way what-if analysis in terms of a quantity. So currently the model has quantity of 10,000, but what if I want to try different quantities? See on the PowerPoint slide, what if I want to try 0, 25,000, 50, and so on and so forth to up to 300,000. Then what's going to be the saving? What's going to be the saving for this one, and for that one? Then we are going to use the what-if analysis. Then let's build the one more column of quantity. Now let's enter some numbers for some quantities that we want to test. So starting from 0, then 25,000, and then let's use increment of 25,000 until we get to 300,000. questions before we move forward? So now we have the quantities that we want to test. Then the next column, in the next column, we want to show our savings. So before we use what if analysis tool, so let's give some instructions for the Excel, for the software. So the saving equation should be selected. So let's give a reference to the software. So the quantity or the saving should be using this equation. So let's select. So in my spreadsheet, my cell is B17. It really depends on where you put this saving value. So you just give a reference. So after we have that, let's select those two columns, and we want to populate the rest of the blanks. After we select those two columns, let's go to data. And here we have what if analysis. What if analysis is under the forecast. So if you are using a different version of Excel, you may you can still see this what if analysis, but the icon would be a little bit different. So what if analysis, then let's select this data table. So because we want to right now we want to do a one-way what if analysis. So let's give an input cell, the column input cell. So let's select quantity. Let's select the quantity because we want to change the quantities. So this columns has the data of different quantities. So let's tell the Excel, okay, we want to change the quantities. Then let's click OK. Then we will have all the numbers that we need. You don't have the number? Here, you want to select your saving here. Let's select So now you have the saving values for different quantities. So if you look at the results, as the quantity increases, the the difference is decreasing from the positive to negative. So up to here, if the quantity that you need is 150,000 units, the cost difference is $9,000. That means the manufacturing cost will be $9,000 more than purchasing that from another vendor. Then if we were here, so of course the purchasing cost is much lower. the manufacturing cost will be lower than the purchasing cost. So this part is easier for us to make our decision. This part is also easier for us to make our decisions. But what if your quantity is this one? In this case, manufacturing cost is still a little bit higher than the purchase cost. Then what's going to be the decision you're going to make? So manufacturing cost is higher, but you have everything under control. What if your vendor is not reliable enough? Then probably there will be a lot of delay in delivery. If the quality is not good, you will have a lot of troubles. So I would say, if the saving is really small, I would go for doing the manufacturing by myself. But it really depends on the scenario. If you have a very reliable vendor, you can just purchase your components from the vendor. Okay.
Return this in.
So let's save this file. We are going to use that on Wednesday. So we don't have to turn in anything today, but we will be using this file in the next class. So let's save the file to a place where you can find it. So we will meet